The hauler's curse. Caleb Mercer's hands wouldn't stop shaking as he gripped the steering wheel, his Peterbilt doing 80 down a highway he couldn't even name anymore. In his rearview mirror, nothing but darkness and the fading glow of a rest area he'd never visit again. On the passenger seat beside him lay a strip of skin, his skin somehow, still warm to the touch, though every inch of his body remained intact. The man in the brown jacket had smiled when he handed it to him, smiled with teeth that were just a little too white, a little too sharp. That was 20 minutes ago. Caleb hadn't looked in the mirror since. He couldn't shake the feeling that, if he did, he'd see something in the back seat that wasn't supposed to be there. Something that had been following him for weeks. Something that knew his name, his roots, and exactly where his sister lived. This is a story of how a West Texas trucker learned that some roads don't just take you somewhere. Some of them bring something back with you. Before we begin, I want to thank every soul that keeps returning to listen. You've turned whispers into echoes. If you haven't already, subscribe and stay close, because what you're about to hear is one story you won't forget. Caleb had been running long haul for 6 years, and he'd learned to sleep through just about anything. Engine noise, CB radio chatter, even the occasional drunk stumbling through the yard at 3 a.m. But the footsteps outside his cab weren't like any of that. They were too deliberate, too patient. The first time he heard them, he was parked at a small trucking yard just outside Odessa, one of those forgotten patches of cracked asphalt surrounded by creosote bushes and chain-link fence. The kind of place where drivers dropped their trailers and caught a few hours of sleep before the next dispatch. Caleb had his curtains drawn, his phone charging, and a half-eaten burrito going cold on the dash. Then came the crunch of gravel, slow, measured, circling. He'd crack the curtain just enough to peer out into the sodium-yellow glow of the yard lights. Nothing, just rows of silent trucks and the distant hum of the interstate. He convinced himself it was a stray dog, maybe a coyote, drawn to the smell of food. West Texas was full of them. But when the tapping started, 3 soft knocks on the driver's side door, his gut told him otherwise. Tap, tap, tap. Caleb's breath caught. He didn't move, didn't answer. The knocking stopped, and after a long minute, the footsteps resumed, slower now, moving toward the back of the trailer. Then they faded entirely. He sat there in the darkness, listening to his own heartbeat, waiting for something else. Another knock, a scratch, anything. But the only sound was the wind pushing against the truck and the occasional pop of cooling metal from the engine. He didn't sleep that night, just sat with his back against the sleeper wall, eyes fixed on the door handle, watching for it to turn. The next morning, Caleb stood outside his Peterbilt with a styrofoam cup of coffee going cold in his hand. Around the truck, pressed deep into the gravel, were tracks. But they weren't boot prints, and they sure as hell weren't paw prints. 3 toes, each one thick, clawed, and spaced too far apart to belong to any animal Caleb had ever seen. They circled the entire rig, stopping directly beneath his sleeper window, where the gravel was disturbed in a strange, swirling pattern, like something had crouched there for a long time, watching. Maybe it's a bird, muttered an older driver who'd wandered over, squinting at the prints. Turkey, maybe, or a crane. Caleb didn't argue, but birds didn't knock. and they sure as hell didn't leave behind the faint smell of something sour and rotten, like roadkill left too long in the sun. He knelt down and ran his fingers along the edge of one print. The dirt was packed hard, pressed deep, like whatever made it was heavy, really heavy. He pulled his hand back when he noticed the gravel around the print had a strange discoloration, darkened, almost oily, like it had been stained by something. "You all right, man?" the older driver asked. Caleb stood, wiping his hand on his jeans. "Yeah, fine." But he wasn't fine. And the smell, God, that smell. It clung to the inside of his nose even after he climbed back in the cab and rolled up the windows. He called his sister that afternoon. Marissa lived in a small rental outside Midland, about 40 minutes east. She picked up on the second ring, and Caleb could hear her 2-year-old babbling in the background. "Hey, Cal, what's up?" "Just checking in," he said, keeping his tone light. "Everything okay out there?" There was a pause. "Actually, yeah, mostly." "Why?" "Mostly?" Marissa sighed. "It's probably nothing, but I keep hearing stuff outside at night. Scratching at the windows. I thought it was branches, but we don't have any trees close to the house." Caleb's stomach dropped. "You see anything?" "Not really, just a shape, maybe. Last night I thought I saw someone standing by the living room window, but when I turned on the porch light, nothing was there." She laughed nervously. "I'm probably just being paranoid. You know how it is out here. Everything creaks." "Lock your doors," Caleb said, his voice harder than he meant it to be. "And call me if you see it again." "Cal, you're scaring me." "Good. Just be careful." 2 days later, Marissa sent him a video. No text, just a 30-second clip from her doorbell camera. Caleb pulled over onto the shoulder of Highway 285 and played it. The footage was grainy, time-stamped at 2:47 a.m. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. Just the empty porch, the dim glow of the motion light, and the faint rustle of wind through the desert scrub. Then from the left edge of the frame, something moved into view. It was tall, too tall, and thin in a way that didn't look human. The figure stood just outside the ring of porch light, its limbs hanging at odd angles, its head cocked to one side like a bird examining prey. There was no face, just a smooth, pale surface where features should have been. The camera flickered, pixelated, and when the image stabilized, the figure was closer. Not walking, just there, inches from the glass. Its head tilted the other way now, like it was listening. Then the footage cut to black. Caleb's hands were slick with sweat as he replayed the clip. In the dirt near Marissa's front step, barely visible in the frame, were the same 3-toed prints he'd seen at the yard. He called her immediately. "Pack a bag, you and the baby. Go stay with Mom for a few days." "Caleb, what the hell is going on?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not just following me anymore." "What do you mean, following you?" "Cal, you're freaking me out." "Just go. Please, I'll explain later." She was quiet for a long moment. Okay, I'll go. But you need to tell me what's happening." "I will, I promise. Just get out of there." Now, after he hung up, Caleb sat on the side of the road for another 20 minutes, staring at the video, watching that smooth, featureless face tilt back and forth. And the worst part, the part that made his skin crawl, was that, in the last frame before the camera cut out, The thing's head was turned toward the lens, like it knew it was being recorded, like it wanted to be seen. The next encounter came at a Love's truck stop outside Fort Stockton. Caleb had just finished fueling and was walking back toward the entrance when a man stepped into his path. Long night, huh? The man was maybe mid-50s, wearing a faded denim jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. His smile was friendly enough, but something about his eyes made Caleb's skin crawl. "Yeah," Caleb muttered, trying to step around him. The man moved with him, blocking his path again. "You look tired, like you haven't been sleeping." "I'm fine." "You sure?" The man's smile widened, and for just a second his pupils seemed to shift, black and elongated like a goat's. "Because you've got that look, the look of someone being followed." Caleb's pulse spiked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do." The man leaned in closer, and Caleb caught a whiff of something rancid, like meat left out in the heat. "You've been marked, friend, and once it picks you, it doesn't stop. It just waits, watches, learns everything about you." "Marked by what?" The man tilted his head, and the motion was too smooth, too fluid. "By something that's been out here longer than the roads, longer than the trucks, longer than the people who built them." His grin stretched wider. "It's patient. It doesn't need to rush. It'll take its time with you. Get out of my way." "You can run," the man continued, ignoring him. "But it already knows where you'll go. Knows where your sister lives. Knows what you're afraid of." Caleb shoved past him, his heart hammering. The lights above them flickered, once, twice, and when they came back on, the man's face had changed, just for a fraction of a second. His jaw was too long, his neck too thin, and his fingers had stretched into something sharp and bone-white. Then he stepped back, tipped his cap, and walked off into the shadows between the trucks. Caleb stood frozen, his breath coming in shallow gasps. When he finally turned around, the man was gone. But near the edge of the lot, barely visible in the dim light, were three-toed tracks leading toward the highway. And next to them, scrawled in the dirt with a clawed finger, were three words: "We see you." It happened 3 nights later on a lonely stretch of Highway 285, halfway between nowhere and nothing. Caleb's engine sputtered once, twice, then died completely. The cab went dark. Even the dashboard lights cut out. He coasted to the shoulder and sat there in the silence, listening to the wind scrape across the desert. His phone had no signal. The CB was dead. And the nearest town was at least 20 miles back. He tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. "Come on," he muttered, twisting the key again. "Come on, come on, come on." Still nothing. The air inside the cab felt thick, oppressive, like the oxygen was being sucked out. Caleb cranked down the window, and the smell hit him immediately. That same rotting chemical stench he'd caught at the yard. And then he heard it. Footsteps in the gravel, slow and deliberate. Caleb's heart hammered as he peered out the window. The moon was high and full, casting long shadows across the scrub. And there, just at the edge of the headlight's reach, something moved. It was pale, skeletal. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending in ways that made Caleb's stomach turn. It moved in a strange, gliding motion, like it was floating just above the ground. Its head swiveled toward the truck, and though it had no eyes, Caleb knew it was looking at him. It started walking, not fast, just steady, purposeful. Caleb slammed his hand on the horn, but nothing happened. He fumbled with the door lock, making sure it was engaged, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The creature was 30 feet away, 20. He could see it clearly now. Its skin was the color of old bone, stretched tight over a frame that looked more insect than human. Its fingers, if they could even be called fingers, were impossibly long, tipped with black claws that scraped against each other as it moved. 10 feet. Caleb twisted the key again. The engine turned over but didn't catch. 5 feet. The creature stopped, tilted its head, and then it smiled, a wide, lipless grin that split its face in half, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth. It reached out with one long, skeletal arm and pressed its hand against the driver's side window. The glass fogged instantly, and a smell like copper and rot filled the cab. Where its palm touched, the glass began to hiss and bubble like it was being eaten away by acid. Caleb screamed and twisted the key one more time, and the engine roared to life. He floored it, gravel spraying as the Peterbilt lurched forward. In the side mirror, he saw the creature standing in the road, motionless, its head still tilted at that unnatural angle, watching him go. On the window, where it had touched, a dark smear remained, thick and oily, with a faint chemical burn eating into the glass. And as Caleb drove, he could still smell it, still feel the weight of that eyeless stare boring into his back. He didn't stop driving until the sun came up. Caleb didn't stop until he reached a rest area outside El Paso. It was nearly 4 a.m., and the place was deserted, except for a single RV parked at the far end. The bathrooms were lit by a single flickering fluorescent tube, casting everything in a sickly green glow. He splashed cold water on his face and stared at himself in the cracked mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man on the edge, like someone who'd seen too much and couldn't unsee it. Behind him, one of the stall doors creaked open. Caleb spun around. A man stood there, rugged, mid-40s, wearing a brown canvas jacket and work boots. He didn't say anything at first, just stared. "You okay?" the man asked finally. His voice was rough, like gravel under tires. "Yeah, fine." The man stepped closer, and Caleb caught that smell again. Faint, but there. Rot and copper and something else. Something chemical. "You don't look fine," the man said. "You look like you've seen something. Something you shouldn't have." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'm good. Thanks." The man smiled, and Caleb's blood turned to ice. It was the same smile, the same wrong, too wide grin. "You're marked," the man said softly. "Marked, marked, marked." And then he began pounding on a stall door behind him, over and over, the metal ringing out like a drumbeat. "Marked, marked, marked." Caleb bolted out of the bathroom and ran for his truck. His hands fumbled with the keys as he yanked open the door and froze. The man in the brown jacket was standing in front of the Peterbilt, blocking the only exit. He moved fast, too fast. 1 second he was behind Caleb in the bathroom. The next he was here, 20 yards away, like he'd teleported. In his hand, he held something pale and wet. Skin. A strip of human skin, still glistening with blood and tissue. "This is yours," the man said calmly, holding it up like an offering. Caleb looked down at his arms, his hands, his chest. No wounds, no blood. He was completely intact. "That's not how—" "It's already started," the man said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The taking, piece by piece. You won't even feel it. Not until it's too late." The man's grin split wider, impossibly wide, and his jaw unhinged with a wet, cracking sound. His body began to fold in on itself, limbs bending backward, spine cracking and reforming. His face melted away like wax under flame, leaving only that smooth, featureless surface. And then he dropped to all fours and began crawling toward the truck, fast, skittering like an insect, his limbs moving in that wrong, inhuman way. Caleb threw the Peterbilt into reverse and smashed through a wooden fence post, tearing out into the scrub. Branches scraped against the sides of the trailer as he plowed through the desert, the creature still crawling behind him, faster now, its claws tearing up chunks of dirt and rock. He didn't look back, didn't stop. He drove until the sun came up and the rest area was miles behind him. When he finally pulled over and checked his cab, the strip of skin was gone. But on the passenger seat, pressed deep into the fabric, were 3 claw marks, and beneath them, written in something dark and oily. Soon, he reported everything to the Texas DPS. 2 troopers drove out to the rest area and found nothing except a long smear of dark blood trailing from the bathroom to the edge of the parking lot. There were scorch marks on the pavement, like something had burned itself into the asphalt. And in the dirt beyond the fence, a trail of 3-toed prints leading out into the desert before they simply stopped. The official report called it an animal attack. A mountain lion, maybe, or a rabid dog. The blood was sent for testing, but the lab said it was too degraded to identify, contaminated with some kind of chemical compound they couldn't explain. But one of the troopers, an older guy with gray in his beard and lines around his eyes, pulled Caleb aside before he left. "You ever hear stories about the old trucking routes?" he asked quietly. "The ones that got shut down back in the 70s? Caleb shook his head. The trooper glanced around like he was making sure no one else was listening. "There used to be a route that ran through here, straight shot from Odessa to El Paso. Drivers started disappearing, not crashes, not breakdowns, just gone. Trucks found on the side of the road, doors open, engines still running, no signs of struggle. Nothing. What happened? State shut it down, rerouted everything through I-10. But some of the old-timers, the ones who drove it before it closed, they all said the same thing." He leaned in closer. "They said there was something out here that followed them. Something that didn't like people driving through its territory." "And you believe that?" The trooper didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the desert, at the endless stretch of sand and rock and sky. "Some things out here don't belong to this world," he said finally. "They follow drivers who travel alone, and once they've marked you—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Just don't drive at night anymore, and don't ever stop in the same place twice." Caleb took his advice. He doesn't sleep in his truck anymore. He stays with family now, parks in well-lit lots, keeps his phone charged and his doors locked. He even thought about quitting, finding a desk job, something local, where he'd never have to see another highway again. But trucking is all he knows, and the road has a way of calling you back. So he still drives, just not at night, and never alone. But some nights, when the wind is still and the house is quiet, he hears them. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling his truck in the driveway. He'll get out of bed and peer through the curtains, his heart pounding, his breath fogging the glass. And he'll see the prints in the dirt, 3-toed, deep, fresh. And he'll know it's still out there, still watching, still waiting. Last week he found something on his windshield. Not a ticket, not a flyer. Just a single strip of pale skin pressed flat against the glass like a calling card. He didn't touch it, didn't call the police. He just drove to the car wash and hosed it off, watching it slide down the glass and disappear into the drain. But that night, the footsteps came back, closer this time, circling, tighter. And when Caleb checked the driveway in the morning, the prints didn't just circle the truck. They led right up to his front door, then stopped, like whatever made them was waiting for an invitation. Because the thing about being marked is simple. You can run as far as you want. You can change your routes, change your habits, change your whole damn life. But you can never really stop. Not when something that patient, that hungry, has decided you're worth the wait. And somewhere out there, on a dark stretch of highway between Odessa and El Paso, it's still walking, still circling, still coming. End